Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you for joining today's webinar hosted by the Sikh Research Institute. My name is Rahuldeep Singh and I will be the host and moderator for today's session. The presentation will begin shortly. Before we get started, I want to review a few housekeeping items and let you know how you can participate in today's web event. I will then provide some information about the Sikh Research Institute and today's presenter, Dr. Rahuldeep Singh Gill, before turning it over for the main presentation. You're looking at an example of the Gotowebinar attendee interface. It is made up of two parts. The viewer window on the left, which allows you to see everything the presenters will share on the screen, and the control panel at the right. Using the orange arrow to open and close the control panel. The audio pane provides audio information. By default, you have joined via mic and speakers. If you prefer, you can join the audio via telephone by selecting Use Telephone, and then the dial-in information, including the PIN, will be displayed. Questions during the webinar should be directed to the moderator. You can send your question either by typing it in your attendee panel, or you may be asking it over the mic. In case you don't have a mic, please state your name, city, and question in the questions panel. As a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded, and everyone will receive an email within 7 days with a link to view a recording of today's event. If for any reason you experience any technical difficulties during the session and you can't see the main presentation, for example, then please do not hesitate to contact me via the chat panel. If you lose your internet connection or have to restart your computer during this session, then you can rejoin the session by clicking on the URL that is included in the original confirmation email. Finally, at the end of the presentation, I will launch a testimonial and feedback window. We'd appreciate if you could take a few moments to provide your feedback and comments on how this session went and how we can improve future sessions. I'll now provide some background on the Institute and also Rahuldeep Singh. The mission of Sikh Research Institute is to provide educational resources to Sikhs to lead a Guru-inspired life. SikhRI is an inclusive resource for you, your family, your community, and 25 million Sikhs worldwide for educational programming, strategic solutions, and Gurmukhi content. I'd also like to introduce our presenter, interfaith activist and Sikh scholar Rahuldeep Singh Gill, Ph.D. is Assistant Professor of Religion at California Lutheran University, where he has launched an Asian Studies minor, served as Associate Director for CLU's Center for Equality and Justice, and will serve as the Center's Director beginning in 2014. In addition to offerings in Christianity, global religions, and Indian thought, he teaches a yearly course on Sikh tradition and has twice won Diversity Professor of the Year since he joined the faculty in 2009. His translations of Bhai Gurdas' Seminar Wars will soon be published, along with an introduction to the Sikh savant's life and contribution. He is currently studying the Sikh congregations of California. Follow him on Twitter. His Twitter handle is @Rahuldeep Gill. And so without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to Rahuldeep Singh to begin today's presentation. Give me a moment. I'll give the presenter rights to Rahuldeep Singh. Okay, Rahuldeep Singh, you should be a presenter now.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you so much, Jasdeep. And thank so much to Sikh Research Institute for hosting me and giving me the opportunity to share some ideas with everyone today. And most of all, thank you for all of you who are on the other end of this call and have made the time on this day to engage in a global Sangat with this amazing technology that we have at our disposal. In preparation for today, I listened back to some previous webinars. Just what a wonderful opportunity it is for that SikhRI provides to engage with each other, engage with the Guru's message. It's been so inspiring to learn more about this venue. I got to hear Professor Nikki Gunindarkar of Colby College, who addressed you all about Guru Nanak's Janam Sakhis. I had a great privilege to listen to Ravinder Singh of Singapore, Santbir Singh of Canada, and other great Gursikhs. And so I hope I can contribute something to these great conversations that have been going on. So what's my goal for today? I'd like to share some wisdom from the Sikh past about tragedy and trauma. To me, Sikhi challenges us to see every tragedy as an opportunity to transform the world in God's name, to uplift the downtrodden, like the Guru lifted all of us up at Geshgar Sahib at Anandpur and gave us his mantle. It's amazing to me that Guru Gobind Singh gave us the mantle of Guruship. He launched us as the Akal Purkh di Fauj, the army of the Eternal One. How do we use this inspiration to transform tragedy to triumph? I'm going to argue today that this impetus to uplift goes very far back in Sikh history. We're going to talk about a lot of things today. We're going to talk about Bhai Gurdas and the concept of Parupakari, which I consider to mean radical concern for others. We're going to talk about Ardas and memory. We're going to talk about the concept of Sarbat da Pala. We're going to use the case of Prabjot Singh's recent response to a hate attack. And I'm going to end with what inspires me about the future of this beautiful tradition that we share called Sikhi. But the question before us today is, we're at the eve of 2014. We're only a few weeks away from the new year, when we're going to be 30 years removed from that traumatic year in our Qaum's history. The question today is, how do we remember 1984? The answer I'm going to begin to offer to that question comes from the Sikh past. And the answer I'm going to offer is that we remember it in a similar way to how Bhai Gurdas remembered Guru Arjan's 1606 death, as an event that seeds a glorious Sikh future. This future is not guaranteed. A big if stands in our way. The experiment is only successful if we act with certain things in mind and with certain concerns at our fore. The condition is that we act not for ourselves, but for others. I'm going to argue that concern for the other is the Sikh way of self-transformation. I'm saying that remembering 1984 is not an opportunity to remember ourselves as victims, but as the agents of God's care in the world. I'm going to talk a lot about the trauma of 1984, but I'm not really going to talk as much about 1984. I'm assuming I'm speaking to an audience who shares some of the basic idea of what that trauma and that traumatic year means in Sikh communal memory. So let me give you some background, some history. Who is Bhai Gurdas? Bhai Gurdas was a very important Sikh writer in the 1600s. He wrote 40 vars, which are long poems, which with between 20 and 50 stanzas each. They're in Punjabi. He wrote also over 600 quatrains called kabits, which are in an early form of Hindi. I received my Ph.D. after doing research on this great man and his works. One of the things that I argued in that research is that Bhai Gurdas wrote his works after 1606, which is the time of the martyrdom of Guru Arjan at the hands of his Mughal tormentors. You can see my dissertation online if you like. We can talk more about that in the question and answer period if people would like to do that. Let me give you some summary about how I have found Bhai Gurdas to be saying what I've been thinking that he's saying about Sikh life. In short, Bhai Gurdas says that God works through us. The Sikh movement is part of God's revelation. The Guru is God's form. Guru Nanak founded the Gurmukh Panth and wrote Bani. Both of these are forms of the Guru. And so in the 1600s, we already have the fundamentals of Guru Granth and Guru Panth being expressed in Bhai Gurdas's works. Guru Nanak, according to Bhai Gurdas, was on a divine mission to create a distinct religious path in the world because the world was suffering from the excesses of human egotism, and the other religions were not helping anymore. So God reveals Guru Nanak, and Guru Nanak reveals the Sikh Panth and shares with the world the revelation of Bani as well. God's agency works through Guru Nanak, through the Bani, through the Panth. Akal Purkh works through us. A core metaphor that I think you have to pay attention to if you want to understand Bhai Gurdas is that of the tree. This is a metaphor for the Sikh community. And the kind of tree that Bhai Gurdas is talking about is the board, usually, which we call in English the banyan tree. The reason being is that the board is an expansive tree. It's unique because it has these structures that look like roots that seem to hang down from the branches. This is a great image to meditate on. The roots are the fruits. And if you know something about Punjabi life, you'll know that you know about the importance of big trees like banyans in the hot summers of Punjab. Trees with thick shade are natural communal air conditioning, if you will. It's winter here now, but imagine, if you will, summer temperatures nearing 120 degrees Fahrenheit, hot, sun, midday heat. What do you do to escape the oppressive, suffocating hot weather? Where do people go when there's no air conditioning? You seek the shade of a giant banyan tree. Summer life happens under the tree, and it's a communal life. In a village, there may be one massive tree big enough to offer refuge to dozens of people at a time. So the banyan tree is a metaphor for cool shade, for caring about others, for making a better world, for providing space for people to thrive. It's also a metaphor for resilience. Trees bear a lot of suffering, Gurdas says. The tree is taking the sun's heat itself and taking a beating from the hot solar rays while providing cool shade to all of those who are underneath it. The tree stands and bears heat and cold and rain and remains still and unperturbed. In the aftermath of Guru Arjan's execution by the Mughal emperor, the tree was a metaphor for Gurdas to talk about how Sikhs should bear that trauma. Like the banyan tree, Sikhs, he says, should steadfastly bear the pain of the event. Like the banyan tree, Sikhs should continue to work for par upkari, care for all, seva, what we may call today sarbat da pala. Bhai Gurdas presents Sikh suffering under Mughal tyranny as a means to future reward. From his own memoirs, we know Mughal Emperor Jahangir assented to Guru Arjan's execution because he viewed the Sikh Guru's mission as a threat to his own imperial stability. Writing in that context, Bhai Gurdas said that because they suffer today, in the future, Sikhs will have access to God's justice, which will vindicate the community and bestow upon it great success and joy. For Bhai Gurdas, the tree is also a metaphor for Sikh growth. In a stanza that begins, Satgur Murd Pargati, Gurmukh Sukhfal Sabad Vichara, Ik Do Hoy Sahas Fal, Bhai Gurdas says that the Guru's form is revealed to the Sikh who contemplates his word. From one fruit, 1,000 Sikhs in congregations spread like Kartar does himself. Seeing, hearing, believing the Guru's own are rare in this world, the Gurmukhs. They merge with feet's dust, and the whole world seeks their feet. The Gurmukh Marg is established, trading in truth. They transcend, their wares are beyond appraisal, indescribable. The Guru's word is beloved in the Sadh Sangat, the Saint Society. Here we see Bhai Gurdas saying that Bani contains the seed that results in the community's full bloom. We often talk about Bani as divine revelation. The community continues that divine revelation by putting that Bani into practice community-wide. Elsewhere in a Kabit, one of those quatrains that I have just one verse of here, Jaise beej boy hot birak bithar gur puran brahm nirankar ekankar hai. Bhai Gurdas says that the Guru is a manifestation of an invisible divine seed, nirankar ekankar. and the Sikhs are the fruits from that tree. Remember, the board tree is unique because it has root-like structures hanging off its branches, so that it looks like its fruits are the same as its roots. Again, this would have been a salient metaphor to Sikhs who were in shock about the trauma from Guru Arjan's death. This is a kind of response to the hardships the community faced at that time, and the community, in order to transcend these hardships, can take on another characteristic of a tree. That is Parupkari. Parupkari is something that shows up a lot in Guru Nanak's, a little bit in Guru Nanak's Bani, more in Guru Amar Das's Bani, a lot in Guru Ram Das's Bani, and a lot more in Guru Arjan's Bani. It means literally other helping. But it's more than that. In some sense, the Sikh mission is for Parupkari, for what I call radical concern for the other. Radical concern for the other. This is why Guru Nanak started this month. The world needed it. God's message needed to be spread. You can see radical concern for the other, Parupkari, at play in basic Sikh institutions like Langar. We know, today for us, Langar is the meal after Gurdwara on Sundays that makes us sleepy, and we go home after Gurdwara on Sunday to take a nap after all that heavy food that we ate. But Langar, of course, is not for us, right? Langar is really for the world. Langar is for everyone. In Guru Nanak's day, we can imagine what the point of Langar was. Even today at the Darbar Sahib, Langar feeds thousands of people every day. Never is anyone asked who they are or for their ability to pay for the meal. The point is the world needs the food and the Sikhs are there to provide it. The Guru commands that. So this is one example of Sikh Parupkari, a Sikh radical concern for the other. Another would be all the water projects that the Guru started. We can think about the Bauli at Govindwal Sahib, the Sarovar at Amritsar, Sarovar at Taran Taran. This is the Guru's bringing water to the Punjab, to the people who needed it. Wells and water projects are a kind of philanthropy. This is Parupkari, radical concern for the other as manifest in Sikh history. And this was part of the work that the Sikh Gurus did in the world. In talking about radical concern for the other, I'd like to clear up about what I mean about radical here. What does the word radical mean? The roots of the word radical have to do with, well, roots. Radical literally refers to what is fundamental in something or inherent in something. It relates to things that are at the root or basis of something, something primary, something original. For Bhai Gurdas, Parupkari, care for others, helping others, is at the root of Sikh life. It also means that having effects that are far-reaching. That's what radical also means, and this is because it gets at the roots of something. The roots are the fruits, the effects on the Sikh tree. And Parupkari is not just charity. It's coming up alongside someone and meeting them where they are at and being concerned with their well-being. Let's talk a little bit more about how this concept is embodied today. It's right there in our Ardas. Every time we remember the Sikh past, we come together as a community, and every time we end Ardas, we remember that we are part of the broader human community. That's such a beautiful part of our tradition that, that we take part in every single time we come together, for some of us several times a day. Ardas means, right, supplication. Ardas ends with a request for Sarbat da Pala, but it begins by enjoining the deity in the name of the Sikh Panth. After remembering the Lord, the Gurus, and the dual forms of the Guru in the Granth and in Panth, scripture and community, we then remember the members of the community throughout history who have contributed to the community's growth and success by laying down their lives for the Sikh tradition. We draw strength from those memories. The spirit of Ardas helps us to surmount the tribulations we may face today. Ardas calls for the victory of the cauldron Deg and the sword Deg. Together, the cauldron, which feeds the needy, and the sword, which seeks God's justice, makes up the emblem burned into the Sikh psyche and imprinted on our Nishan, reminding us just exactly what we stand for. Right? We pray for every holy site that has been split off from the community. We think about the most significant collective memories of the tradition through practices that bring sacred recollection to our hearts, thereby recollecting the disparate pieces of our traditions, collecting us again together as a community. In the Ardas, we remember our gurus, our martyrs, those who sacrificed for the faith. We recall our sacred spaces. The prayer itself reminds us why we bear the markers of that faith despite difficulty, to stand for the feeding of all that the cauldron provides and the justice that the sword promises. Collecting, gathering, assembling these memories, we turn again and again into a community of believers. We remember ourselves. We again affirm and reaffirm our membership. And I think in SikhRI documents, Sikh Research Institute documents that I've looked at, SikhRI calls this the Panthik angle, right? And then the last three sentences of Ardas take a total turn in moving from the specific memories, requirements, and supplications of the community addressing the Almighty to asking for the welfare of all people. And I think SikhRI calls this the Sarbat angle. This is what makes Ardas exceptional for me. And this is where Sikhs gain their zeals to be Sikhs, despite the difficulties, despite the hate crimes, and in the unspeakable, painful violence in Oak Creek, Wisconsin that shocked us all in August of 2012. Despite the hate crimes like the one bore by people like Prabjot Singh this year. Despite the trauma of losing 3,000 brothers and sisters and more to brutal genocidal attacks in November of 1984. After remembering our great figures, painful events, specific historical circumstances, the Ardas tells us that we're supposed to take strength back into the world where non-Sikhs also live and seek their benefit as well. We begin this by simply putting forth the unconditional request to God that all people fare well in God's mysterious unfolding plan. The Ardas declares, Sarbat de Kaj Ras, may the Lord be beneficent to all, and asks for Sarbat da Pala, the well-being of all. Two basic issues about this are salient for our consideration. And again, the first is that memory, even in its communal form, is particular. All religious people remember particular moments in the histories of their traditions. In remembering these moments, we reaffirm our membership to the community. The very process of engaging in and remembering these events, which are sacred events, draws boundaries between our community and other communities. But then, again, there is that moment when the Ardas seeks Sarbat da Pala, blessings for all. A great universal moment repeated every time we Sikhs fold our hands in prayer. And that is the other second issue to consider today is that we belong to the universal human we. That is why we're here, I think, what we're trying to affirm as Sikhs today on this call. It is the our, the us, that is the realm of our particular communities that makes us who we are as religious people, and then there's the our, the us, that is the possessive pronoun of the universal human we. So engaging as Sikhs with a wider world, it seems, requires us to somehow belong to both of these things. Engaging in this diaspora that we find ourselves in, the Sikh diaspora, asks of us to hold in tension the specific and the general, the me and the we. Let's look at how Prabjot Singh handled that. Let's look at his case. One of the latest ways in which Sikhi has expressed concern for the larger us through the particular Sikh us. You may know that after becoming the victim of a vicious hate crime in his home neighborhood of Harlem this past September, Prabjot Singh, a professor of global health and a physician, had to speak at a press conference as people wanted to know his response to the situation. He said that he had been the recipient of extreme kindness and compassion. Strangers on the street, he said, came to his aid. He was grateful to have received medical attention at the very hospital he practices as a physician. He says his friends rallied around him. He was grateful that the police department treated his case with extreme diligence. And then, folks were shocked to hear that in this media availability after the attack, Prabjot issued an open invitation to his attackers to ask questions about our Sikh faith, to meet him at a gurdwara, to understand the Sikh religion. He said that only if we welcome these misguided youths to engage with us can we really try to make sure that they have an opportunity to learn from their own misguided acts. Merely holding them accountable through the criminal justice system, he said, which we know is itself imperfect, would fall short of improving these youth so that they are better people as a result of their mistake. Even though they attack Prabhupada in the true spirit of Sikhi, he wants them to become better people. They should take responsibility for their actions, but also remedy their poor judgments and their ignorance. I think Prabhupada's gracious and graceful response was the Sikh response par excellence. Now, he didn't have to respond as he did. Had he brandished a weapon that night to save his skin, hardly any Sikh would have objected. Attacked as he was, he could have been hurt much worse. He had a baby and a wife at home, a long life ahead of him. His attackers were many. He was with one friend. Guru Nanak tells us, "Jis sakte ko mare, tam man ros na hui," right? Prabhupada was defenseless, and it wasn't a fair fight. We might be able to draw from Guru Nanak's Bani that had he escalated with a weapon, he would have been in his right. But he didn't do that. Not at that moment with a weapon, and not during the aftermath with his words. Perhaps, being a Sikh, Prabhupada understands violence or frustration. Prabhupada Singh remembers the Sikh struggle for freedom. He doesn't condone it, he doesn't accept it, but he might be in a position to see that the violent have been victims of violence before. What good would it be to perpetuate anger, violence, and hatred? Isn't it so much better to try to end it with inclusion, education, and mutual engagement? It's the same reason why after hate shooter Wade Michael Page killed himself after shooting up a Gurdwara in Wisconsin last year, the Sikh survivors prayed for his soul at the memorial service. The statement that they made that day was that we may all be lost souls, but we are all souls that belong to Akal Purkh. Sarbat Da Pala was at work in those three people who helped Prabhupada off the sidewalk that night. They could have just kept walking like sometimes happens in New York City and our other cities. But they saw something was wrong and they did what was right. Beyond serving their own individual self-interest, that's the kind of community we need to build. That's Parupkari, that's radical concern for the other. How do we cultivate the kind of energy Prabhupada Singh has? How do we write it large across society? I think through engagement, through radical concern for others, through Parupkari. Sikhi teaches us to serve, to care, and to engage the world for the greater good. Prabhupada studies and teaches community health in academia and focuses on the contributions of community health workers. He creates opportunities for people while increasing health outcomes over the long term. It's all about communities, he insists. He tries to bring the best low-cost global solutions in healthcare, like the idea of community health workers, for instance, back to America. So the week after his attack, in spite of the attack and all the healing he needed to do, he was already back working for the greater good. Right? That's the Sikh spirit. That's Chardikala. That's Parupkari. That's radical concern for the other. It's not been, 10 days since Nelson Mandela breathed his last breath. Let's remember then for a second Mandela's greatness. One of the reasons Mandela is remembered as being such a great leader is his concern for reconciliation. When he was inaugurated as the first black president of South Africa in 1994, he brought his jailer with him to the inauguration as a guest of honor. The same jailer that was once his tormentor at a jail, Robben Island, where he spent decades of his life. The same prison that punished Mandela's fight against apartheid, the same apartheid that extended the colonial experience into a socially instituted racism that dominated black South Africans in their own land. Through Nelson Mandela's visionary invitation, the apartheid-era jailer from Robben Island became a symbol for the new South Africa under a black president. The ugliness was inverted. Recently, President Obama has said that Mandiba freed not only the prisoner, but the jailer as well. That's radical concern for the other. Ibu Patel, a very important American Muslim and an interfaith activist, writes about Jesse Jackson speaking at a dinner put on by Muslim activists in the context immediately following the September attacks. And I'm going to pull here from my friend Ibu Patel's book, Sacred Ground, which urge all of you to read. One of the hosts of that dinner gave a rousing speech about the dangers to Muslims in America and the need for a new Muslim civil rights movement, right? Let me quote Patel now on how Jesse Jackson followed that call up. The chief guest at the dinner was Reverend Jesse Jackson. Perhaps the Muslim speaker felt as if he was paying homage to the movement Jackson helped lead. If so, what happened next must have come as something of a shock. Jackson opened his speech by saying, "There is no such thing as Muslim civil rights." Patel continues, "The marches, the sit-ins, the braving of fire hoses and attack dogs had not been about safeguarding the rights of one community. The purpose was to expand and secure a framework that protected all communities. We weren't fighting for black civil rights," Jackson told his audience. "We were fighting for your civil rights. You have a choice right now. You can talk about an America where your people don't get sent to the back of the bus, or you can talk about an America where no one gets sent to the back of the bus." I think that's the Sikh way. That's Bhai Gurdas's way. That's radical concern for the other. I'm reminded here of the words of the indigenous Australian activist, Lilla Watson. She says, "If you've come here to help me, you're wasting our time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let's work together." Pravjot Singh is not Nelson Mandela, but for the American media movement, he was pretty awesome at that time. They say, America has 500,000 Sikhs. Can we be 500,000 Nelson Mandelas in America? If the Guru is in the Sangat and Pravjot Singh is capable of at least being Nelson Mandela, then so are we. This is why, for me, Paropkari takes the form of interfaith. Interfaith cooperation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I see this working on the ground in the work that I do. Something that I do in my activism is I try to encourage interfaith cooperation by encouraging my students towards it and trying to build bridges across faith divides. Let me define interfaith for a second, because it's often used sometimes and misused. It's a misused term, right? So when I'm talking about interfaith, I'm talking about using my religious tradition to bridge divides through cooperation. I'm not just talking about dialogue. And I'm certainly not talking about watering down anyone's religion to get to some relativistic notion that religions are saying the same thing, right? They're not. The point that I'm talking about is building bridges of cooperation across religious boundaries. For me, for how this works in my life, I'm convinced that interfaith is inherently Sikh, and that Sikhs are ideal interfaith activists. An organization that I think is doing awesome interfaith work, and I would love to see Sikhs more active in this work, especially college-age Sikhs, Sikhs at colleges and universities, is the Interfaith Youth Corps, or IFYC. What is the kind of work being done at Interfaith Youth Corps? This kind of service-oriented work that can be an organic outgrowth of an engaged Sikh life. This kind of work is relevant to Sikhs. It has a long precedence in Sikh history, and I hope it'll have a long future. Because we Sikhs find ourselves a minority tradition wherever we go, working across faith boundaries to make the world a better place is just a daily fact of life for us, right? An absolute necessity. I think it is the best way to educate people on Sikh principles and about Sikh identity. That is, work alongside them, enact the very best of our human heritage, and show them that our liberation is always bound up in theirs. I have to tell you that Sikhs I speak with about this get so excited about this angle in community service. It seems that, as a community, we're ready to take this on, and people are always asking me for ideas on how to get started. It turns out that we're already out there doing it. I'm sure people on this call are out there doing it. We're going out to homeless shelters and feeding folks and volunteering. There are members, today probably who sit on interfaith boards and interreligious councils. But I just don't think we've put it all together yet. I'm excited to see what happens when more and more gurdwaras and Sikh organizations take the ethic of service outside of the gurdwaras to people in their larger communities. The seeds are going to be sown, though, on college and university campuses with the work being done by people through the Interfaith Youth Corps. Amazing things are going to happen when people team up together with other religious organizations and build across traditions in this work. I'm totally convinced that Interfaith Youth Corps' model of engaged service is spot on. Get out there and serve your community, engage, and act out of your deepest principles. It gives minority religions like the Sikh tradition an authentic place at the table because we already have an ethic of interfaith cooperation, right? I'm arguing today that we call that paropkari. This is so much more welcoming than the old model of privileging dialogue over everything else. Sikhs can and will excel at participating in these kinds of partnerships, and I think the day is not far away when members of our tiny community of some of America's most recent immigrants will be the stalwart leaders in the interfaith service work. I think it'll be better for us, and I think America will be better for it too. So let me begin to wrap up, and I'm really, really excited about wrapping up, not just because I can stop yapping at you, but I can hopefully interact with you, hear some of your questions, hear where you're at, and we can have somewhat of a dialogue. Let me finish by telling you how inspired I am by our Sikh tradition, by its teachings, by thinkers such as Bhai Gurdas, and by the selfless Sikhs out there doing the Guru's work. Earlier this summer, I was giving a talk to Sikh tradition. I was giving a talk about SikhRI to actually the Interfaith Youth Corps workers when one of the members of the audience, which is also a webinar, asked me what I thought was a remarkably sharp question. He asked, why are Sikhs in America so good at institution building? And I was pretty impressed. I thought, wow, this guy must know something about America's great gurdwaras. Perhaps he's been to a Sikh Day parade or two, or Nagar Kirtan or something. Or maybe he knows about the new generation of Sikh organizations that are popping up, like Khalsa Aid, right? A humanitarian relief agency that has helped to rebuild earthquake-ravaged countries. In the few seconds that I answered, the seconds before I answered his question, my mind flashed through all the reasons I could have listed for Sikh institutional expression, like the fact that we have highly educated backgrounds of so many immigrants, and that results in a lot of really well-funded projects. I could have quoted several lines from Barney about the need for service and action in the world. But kind of to my surprise, another answer came out of my mouth. I said, it's because that's what the Gurus did. They weren't just holy men. They were institution builders. They lived the Sikh mission. And it wasn't just the Gurus, right? Mata Kivi, to whom Guru Angad was wed, is the first woman mentioned in the Guru Granth Sahib for the success of the langar that she ran. Sikh poets Satta and Balwand sing her praises for her leadership in this community kitchen. Balwand Kivi Nek Jan Jis Bauti Chau Patrali, Langar Daulat Vandiya Ras Amrit Kheer Ke Ali. And to translate, Balwand says, Kivi is a great woman, a tree of cool shade. Langar is the wealth that she shares, buttery kheer like nectar. It's page 967 of the Guru Granth Sahib. So Mata Kivi's contribution was not just about the food or the service she provided. Langar was, and thankfully continues to be, the most important Sikh institution. It requires an organizational mind, or several of them. It requires planning and networking and logistics management. It's a mission-driven project that requires imagination and execution. Langar began at Guru Nanak's own house, the first Gurdwara, where Sikhs first met to worship. In the town of Kartarpur, travelers from far and wide who came to seek our founder's blessings would have found it necessary to enjoy the dal and roti from the cauldrons, the deg of Kartarpur's kitchen. The cauldron, or deg, is half the inspiration for Guru Gobind Singh's mission of deg, fateh, victory of the cauldron and the sword. I love that. The sword exists to protect the service that the cauldron provides. That is what inspires me. And today I see young Sikhs feeding the poor and building institutions of service that give living expression to Guru Nanak's Bani. Nicha andar neech jaat, nichi hu at neech, Nanak tinke sang saath vaddiyan sio kya rees, jithe neech samaliyan, tithe nadar teri bakshis. Page 15 of the Guru Granth Sahib. The lowest of the low-born, the very lowest of the low, that's whom Nanak stands with. I can't compete with the high. God's blessings are verily there wherever the lowest get care. I think Bhai Gurdas understood with impeccable clarity the Guru's message to identify with the needy. So activism on behalf of the downcast and the outcast is the foundation of our spiritual quest for Akal Purukh's grace or Nadar. Activism is itself a kind of liberation, not the selfish escape of me and my soul from the pain of worldly existence, but an emancipation that comes from removing barriers to God's inextinguishable grace shining down on all. So my vision for Sikh life in America and around the world, wherever you're listening to this call from, is that we use our gurdwaras as launching grounds in our struggle for a more just world. We can't just be limited to the Gurdwara, though. Our Gurdwaras are great base institutions, but they're not the be-all of Sikh life. We need to invite our non-Sikh neighbors to our Gurdwaras, and we need to go out into the world with a greater sense of urgency. We need to continue growing and supporting our other institutions, and not just after violent attacks, and not just in reaction, but proactively, institutionally, all the time. Khalsa Aid is an example of such an organization, and there are others. Seva Food Bank in Toronto expands the Sikh spirit of langar to bring nutrition to those in need. Khalsa Peace Corps right here in Los Angeles, where I'm from, takes food to the most destitute and dangerous, I would say, parts of Los Angeles. My friends at the Sikh Feminist Research Institute, or SUFFER, and the Jakara movement, which is so exciting, are inspiring generations to think of their tradition as the Guru's engine for social uplift. Look, we're going to be a tiny minority wherever we go. Let's outperform our numbers through service and engaged work that pushes our community boundaries. Let us be overrepresented in justice. Let's boldly and humbly take the mantle of leadership that the Gurus lived as an expression of Karta Purukh's grace. So let me ask you now, what is it about 1984 that we need to remember? Is it the storming of the Darbar Sahib? Is it Operation Blue Star and Operation Woodrose? Is it the Delhi quote-unquote riots, which weren't limited to Delhi and weren't even exactly riots, but mass killings, pogroms, slaughters, and of course some even say genocide? Or is it the aftermath of 1947's partition of the subcontinent? Is it the 37 frustrating years between independence and Blue Star? Is it the colonial period? Is it KPS Gill and the decimation of an entire generation of Sikhs? Is it JS cholera and the impunity of Indian security forces? Or is it pogroms that continue against Muslims in India? Is it the slaughter and persecution of Christians? Is it the Babri Masjid? Is it the Syrian civil war today, or Tibetans' plight in China? Or is 1984 about 1 billion people in this world who struggle with hunger today? Yes, it's about us, and it's about our history. And yet, it's not just about us. It's about the suffering that continues in this world. How can we intervene? It's not about our human rights, but about everyone's rights. Did Guru Arjan give his life for just our sake? Did Guru Tegh Bahadur? For whom did Guru Gobind Singh give his 4 sons? For whom did Guru Hargobind go to jail, and for whom did he liberate 52 kings? For whom did Guru Nanak walk to Makkah? And for whom did Guru Amar Das add Bhagat Ravidas, the tanner, the outcast, to the Sikh scripture? Are these acts for us, for you, and for me, or are they for the liberation of the whole world? Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. So I am excited about taking questions right now. I hope a lot of you will stay with us. And Jasdeep, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, question from Gurtej Singh from Wellington, New Zealand. And he says, talking about reconciliation, how is it possible about 1984 when government in India is in total denial about the number of people killed by the troops and mobs at Darbar Sahib in New Delhi and other places, and the subsequent installing of some cult groups as fifth columns within the Sikh institutions? And I think his main concern is about how do we reconciliate, or how do we deal with this situation?
Great question. It's a question, that I struggle with. Look, Nelson Mandela won an election, right? And he was able to reconcile because he was put in a position of power. But how he got that power was, I think, through not just caring about himself and not just caring about where he's at. So maybe the reconciliation doesn't happen with the Indian government right now. Maybe it doesn't happen with the RSS right now. But who is there in India? Who needs us, right? Who can we speak to that needs the Sikh message? That needs not just the Sikh message, but Sikh activism, Sikh institutions to be built around them. Is it the Dalits in Punjab? Is it the migrant workers, right? That work in the aftermath of the Green Revolution. I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to engage and show that we're more than victims. I totally agree with you, and it's these things bother me quite a bit, and it's because of those things that I'm thinking that let's find a way around those situations. Let's circumvent the power structure, because the power structure is not working for us, right? The Akali Dal is in cahoots with the Hindu right, who is oppressing all kinds of minorities in India. This makes absolutely no sense. So I hear you, brother, in New Zealand, and I'm so glad to have, again, this global Sangat. My question is, what can we do to shift the conversation? If people aren't going to listen to us one way, how are we going to get them to hear us in another way? And for me, Bhai Gurdas is saying, help those who need help. It's not just you who needs help. So that would be my answer to that.
Thank you, Guruji. At this point in time, I don't have more questions from the audience. We can wait for some more minutes.
Okay, yeah. If there are audience members out there listening, I really encourage you to get in contact with me through email or on Twitter. I love engaging with people. I hope we can get a few more questions today. If not today, then people are listening to this in the recording form, then I would love to continue to engage and be challenged and to seek more clarity for my own mind. So I hope people are out there. I think that's the job of Sikh scholars, people who call themselves scholars anyways, is to be there with the community and to be better scholars because the community is challenging them. So I hope there are people.
Thank you. We do have couple more questions. Question from Tavleen Kaur. She does not mention where she is from. But what would you say is the best way to remember / engage with memorial projects? And she's from Detroit. She just said that.
Awesome. Thank you, Tavleen Benji from Detroit, Michigan. I think we may have met. I think it's important for every memorial event that we do to have a public service element. so that we invite outsiders, non-Sikhs, to these memorial events, ask them to engage with us through some kind of service project where we remember and we are doing something for somebody else. So, you know, there are service organizations that we can get in touch with across America, and they're all there on university campuses. So something that we do, for example, here on our Cal Lutheran campus is, like, there's a 9/11 memorial, and the 9/11 memorial is building care packages and sending them to families of troops, or, you know, collecting food and you know, doing something as basic as food pantry donation, so that the remembering and the paropkari are going hand in hand, and you're inviting people who aren't normally engaged with you on that basic level of who are the Sikhs and what are they remembering. So you're engaging them in the remembering, and you're engaging them in the service work. So for me, both of those things in memorial services, I think, are pretty powerful to put together.
Thank you, Virji. Next question is from Mani Singh. And he asks, how do we reconcile from the current issue of Gurubaksh Singh initiative, the initiative that he had taken with us in India? Our own institutions are failing us.
Is this I think Gurubaksh Singh, the person who's been fasting and then was picked up?
I believe so.
I mean, isn't that such a painful thing to watch happen? Yeah, I'm totally there with you, brother. You know, I think the exciting thing for me that's happening, and this is such a Khalsa way of doing things, is that you can pick up one man, right, who is fasting, but there's 25 million of us, right, and you can't come get all of us. So I think what Gurubaksh Singh is doing there is so powerful. It's something that's been there in the 20th century, you know, for Sikhs to mobilize in nonviolent ways and get attention. Our Sikh leadership hasn't always done a great job of dealing with it, but I think this is a case in which Sikhs are taking up that mantle, and you know, there's Sikhs in Europe and Sikhs elsewhere in India who are now fasting, right? So, you know, Sanu Korno ke lajuga, they're saying, right? Come get us, and we're gonna, you know, we're gonna do what Baba Nanak inspired us to do, what Guru Gobind Singh inspired us to do. We're gonna all become faces of justice. I just think people are doing it, and it's so rich, and it's so powerful, and it's so inspirational.
Okay, thank you, Virji. Next question is from Bibek Singh from Chandigarh. And he says, thank you for the wonderful talk. How can we use existing platforms like Gurdwaras to engage ourselves in more acts of social services?
Thank you from Chandigarh. You know, I was born in Chandigarh. We have a lot of family back in Chandigarh, so Chandigarh's near and dear to my heart. So I hope things are well there. So how do we gauge? In Chandigarh is a little bit different than how we engaged in Chicago, but maybe not so different. I mean, I think for me, the biggest Sikh institution, the biggest Sikh platform that is there is the Langar, right? And in the United States, at least, we don't have outsiders coming to Langar because it's not known about, you know, maybe the community doesn't have the capacity to feed tons and tons of outsiders. But sometimes maybe we take Langar, you know, to the people. Sometimes we don't just wait for people to come to us. I could imagine you could do the same thing in Chandigarh. Another thing that I think is needed all across the world is access to medical care, basic, not just, you know, emergency medicine, but preventive medicine. You know, I think Gurdwaras should also be centers of care for the body, right? Mera Vaid Guru Gobinda, I think for me means God should provide medicine, and if God is working through us, you know, we should provide at least basic access to medicine. That doesn't take a lot of top-down organizational strength. I think these are small steps that we can take as members of the Sanghat. A lot of us are trained in medical sciences to provide these resources to the larger community. And I'm happy to say there are gurdwaras who are doing that. We need to follow those models. We need to network across the globe with how they're doing it, compare notes, and do more of it. So those are two ways.
No more questions right now. Maybe we'll wait for a couple more minutes, and then if no questions come, then we'll wrap this up, Reggie.
For sure. And like I said, my dissertation is available online. I have a website, rahuldeepgill.com. I feel like I want to be a public scholar. I'm there for people. I love when people engage with me. I love these questions, and this is why I'm here. So in whatever way I could ever be useful to any organizations, any Sikh youth, any Sanghats, I say please tell me how I can serve and how I can do a better job. That's something that I really hope people hear me say.
Thank you, Virji, and thank you all for your questions. Please be reminded that these webinars are provided for free, but there is a cost associated with its technology and administration. If you feel you have benefited from this particular webinar and others in the past, please consider making a donation to SikhRI or becoming a webinar sponsor. More details can be obtained in the follow-up email you will receive or by emailing info@sikhri.org. As I end the webinar, I'd like to thank the presenter and the audience for coming today, and to remind everyone to wait for a few seconds for a link to appear to a follow-up survey. Your feedback is extremely important to Sikh Research Institute, and we appreciate your time. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.